What is happening, people? It is Brian Alsruhe, neversay.com, and for today's video, I want to talk about a squat mistake that just about every single person in the world who's ever had a squat bar on their back has dealt with, and that is when your knees collapse in. If you haven't dealt with this, trust me, you absolutely will when the weight gets heavy enough or just when you've spent enough time. And it doesn't matter how far advanced you are, pushing your knees out on the squat is something that you are never, ever going to be able to forget about. So I figured since it is such a big deal that I would spend an entire video talking about how to fix it. Now to begin, the reason why this is such a bad thing is because if your knees collapse in forward, then your butt shoots back. And if your butt shoots back, then that means that that bar comes forward. And anytime that that bar comes forward off of the middle of your foot, then you are losing power. It doesn't make any sense. The exact same way that if I was going to pick up another human being, I would not do it way out away from my body. I hug them to me as tightly as possible, keep them as lined up with my spine as I can, and then they're a lot lighter. Same exact thing on a squat. If your knees collapse in and your butt's backwards, that bar's forward, you're in for a fight. So of course there are a lot of reasons why this could be happening, but probably the most common of which is just that you're doing something technically wrong. Doesn't matter how advanced we get, we're still doing things technically wrong. So that's what the first part of the video is gonna be about, is just taking a lot of that out. And if you are an advanced lifter who doesn't really have this much of a problem with it, trust me, there's gonna be a couple things that I'm gonna cover with your feet and your ankles that you could probably just tweak and become at least a little bit more stable. So you're gonna wanna check that out. The second reason often why people's knees are collapsing in is because their quads just are a little bit weak. So when they're in the bottom of the squat at that most stretched, you need your quads most point, if they're not strong enough, they will always call for help. And typically they will go to your adductors, which ends up pulling your knees inward a little bit. But even if it is not that, then a very, very common reason why your knees could be collapsing in is that you're just not using your butt. Now your butt is one of the biggest, strongest muscles that you have for just about any big moving weight movement there is. However, if your knees are collapsing in, then most likely you're not even using it. So by the end of this video, it will be my goal to absolutely remedy all those problems that you have. And the first thing that we are going to tackle is going to be that technique. And we're going to start from the ground up, beginning with your feet. Now, the very first thing that I would say about your feet and how it relates to keeping your knees out on the squat is that your knees are always going to follow your toes. And I know there's a lot of people out there that want to squat with their feet straight forward, and I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that you're definitely upping your chances of your knees being able to cave in. You'd be much better off pointing your toes out just a little bit. Now, I'm not saying you need to get absolutely duck-footed. Maybe you do, depending on how your knees work and your legs work, because it's gonna be different for everybody. But most people find that pointing their toes out at least a little bit, maybe to like a 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, or 1 o'clock, 11 o'clock type of position will just make it a lot easier for your knees to travel outward instead of straight forward when you are squatting. So very first thing to consider is just take a look at your squat and make sure that you are not keeping your feet so pointed forward that your knees are actually tracking inward instead of being able to push outward. The second thing is the moment you mention feet and squat in the same sentence, there's inevitably going to be some coaches who say you need to push through your heels. And again, I'm not saying it wrong. I'm just saying you don't have it completely right. There are a lot of coaches who will say 3 points of contact to include your heel, kind of the outside edge of your foot, and then kind of below your big toe. So 3 points of contact. And again, I'm not saying you're wrong, but ideally, if you lived in a perfect world, a perfect squatting universe, you would get your foot as flat on the ground as you possibly could, because the more purchase that you have there, the more balance and more control you have. That's exactly why you choose to wear a flat-soled shoe like a Converse or a squat shoe as opposed to a tennis shoe when you were squatting, so you don't get all that rolling around. Same exact thing can happen with your foot, so you want that thing as flat and as squat as possible. So in order to achieve these pancake feet, what I would recommend that you do is try to spread your toes out as much as you possibly can. Now, we live in a society where almost all of you wear shoes about 99% of the time, so this is gonna be weird. You might need to stick your fingers between your toes, kind of stretch them out, get your feet working again. However, if inside your shoes, you can think about spreading your toes apart as far as you possibly can and then start externally rotating them. Try to rotate and screw your feet into the ground. Now, when you're doing that, I literally want you to visualize each one of your toes being like roots on a tree. And as you screw outward, those roots are just taking plant into the ground and it's just flattening your foot out. It is literally pulling your foot till it is flat on the ground. Also, feel free to do this at your desk or wherever you're sitting. You probably don't want to do it if you're driving, but otherwise, go ahead, feel free. It'll do the same thing no matter where you're at, because once you have that foot set, you have those feet spread, right? Flat and as squat as you possibly can. Now, we're obviously gonna set your knee after that because this entire video is about pushing your knees outward. However, we have a joint between that needs something done with it. So your ankle obviously can still be loose even if your foot is rooted in the ground. So you want to stack it. And by stacking it, I just mean try to think about forcing weight downward and outward and still externally rotating your feet. You're still trying to screw them into the ground, and you should feel your ankles just kind of lock into place. So once you lock your feet, then you lock your ankle. Once your ankle is good and set, then you can move onto your knee. Now, if you've done everything correct up to this point, there's actually not gonna be a ton of external movement on your knee because you are so set. But instead, when you are pushing your knees outward and trying to just rotate them externally, you will feel that in your hips, you feel your butt firing. Your butt is absolutely doing things that it is not normally doing, and you can already tell that you are using a lot more muscle groups and everything is a lot tighter than it was normally when you're walking a squat bar out. And typically a tighter setup leads to more stability, and more stability leads to moving more weight. But if all of that is set up and your upper body is good to go for this squat, then it is time to descend. Now, what you do here in your mind is gonna be up to you because everyone's cues inside their head are different. However, for me personally, since a problem of mine is that knee valgus, that knee collapse in, one of the things that I start doing from the beginning is think, push your knees out to initiate descent. So I literally think, push my knees out, and that's what starts sinking my body. Very similar to a pregnant woman that needs to sit down in a chair. She doesn't just flop down. She needs to push her knees out to allow room for her body to descend. However, the descent, when you are dropping with that bar, is where a lot of people do lose much of their tightness because they rush it. Guys, only descend as quickly as you can hold tight. If you start losing any tightness at all, it is all gonna show up when you bottom out and try to reverse this bar. So take your time, make sure everything is tight and you're pushing your knees out to get down there. A lot of people in the bottom have problems because they need to get an extra inch or two deeper. And so they have a coach or a training partner yelling, gotta go down, deeper, 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 whatever. And instead of creating room for their body to get deeper, all they do is bend further forward, which is absolutely logical because your head is thinking down and you are in fact probably lowering that bar some. However, the actual crease to the top of your knee isn't really changing whatsoever. In order to do that, you simply need to push your knees out further again. You're gonna have a lot of problems if they have already started to collapse on the way down. You're absolutely not hitting depth if that has happened. So if you're having depth problems or knee caving in problems, a very likely culprit could be that in the bottom, when you're trying to get a little bit deeper, you're bending with the bar instead of just simply pushing your knees out further to receive a little bit more of your body. It's easy to get another inch or two and you won't really lose that much power because your body stays just as erect as it was. Which, if you did everything correctly, then now it's time just to stand up. And if you did all of that, then most likely you're not gonna have a lot of problems with your knees collapsing. And you're of course still gonna need to think about forcing them outward, but for the most part, you're gonna be thinking about literally pushing your body into the ground. Like that bar is an immovable object. You're pushing your body into the ground and it's gonna come up because your knees are gonna stay just like pillars on a building. They're gonna be right underneath your body and not collapsing in. However, much like everything else involved in this weightlifting world, that is a lot easier said than done. So right now I'm gonna give you guys a couple drills, just kind of get your mind around the idea of pushing your knees out for the entire squat, as well as kind of getting your butt triggered and letting up so that you don't need to think about it quite as much. The very first drill that I like to do with athletes and myself especially is kind of a side straddle walk. Now, in order to do this, you're going to need either a hip circle from Slingshot, use the code DIEMPTY, or you can just double up resistance band because that works completely fine as well. However, once you do have that, all I want you to do is kind of stick this around the outside of your knees, just a little bit above kind of your joint, and then you want to get kind of into a quarter squat position, and then you're just gonna move. On the balls of your feet, you're just gonna side straddle. You're always gonna keep tension, so your butt is always having to work to keep your knees pushed out, but not so much tension that you're actually fighting it, right? And it's definitely worth mentioning that on any of this, guys, this is just for the mental cue. You do not need a ton of tension. The more weight that you stick around your knees is not gonna make you any better at this as long as you are actually able to fire your butt. Think of it more like someone just placing their hand on the outside of your knee so that you have a physical cue to push against, not actual resistance. Another method I've used in the past is actually on some of my warm-up sets or just with an empty bar or a very light bar, is still keep that hip circle or those resistance bands around my knees and just do a couple sets like that where I actually have to physically push my knees out. Again, not about using a ton of weight there, just about the physical cue so that while I'm actually squatting, I'm thinking my butt is constantly firing so that my knees stay out the entirety of the movement. However, I do know there are some people out there that might be a little bit too advanced for, or maybe you just have one knee that collapses in because of a surgery or a weakness or a muscle imbalance or something like that. So if that's the case, then all you need to do is just grab an even smaller band, tie it off to a rack of the opposite leg or the opposite side, and then simply do this exact same thing, as long as that pressure that the band is creating is going to be outward so that you need to continually push it out. And then finally, guys, if you still find your knees collapsing, maybe you just need to work on your quads. Now, I know a lot of people do not like the front squat because you can't get the front rack position or it hurts or it's uncomfortable or whatever billion reasons that people give why they do not like the front squat. However, it is one of my favorite ways to build up your quads, and it is one of the biggest combatants to that knee valgus thing that I talked about all video long. So I have an entire video talking about different ways that you can do the front squat where you don't need to be in front rack position, shooting down a lot of the common reasons why people do not perform them. But guys, even if you choose not to do front squats, just choose some sort of quad dominant exercise so you can start bringing up some of that weak point. Even if that is not the case, then at least your quads got stronger, and that's never really a bad thing when it comes to squatting anyway. So guys, there you go. Hopefully there was something in this video that you haven't tried before that might help keep your knees out a little bit, because absolutely having them pinch in like that is not a healthy position, is not a powerful position, and it looks really, really ugly. So I'd rather see everyone just hit some squat PRs by pushing your knees out, getting it done, and hopefully some of these tips will help. If they do, hold on to them. If they don't, discard them. I can play completely fine either way. Guys, I will catch up with you later in the week. Until I do, go out to something amazing in your lives. Keep working hard, people. Be nice to each other. Please. I'll see you then.